Hey, what's up? If you haven't watched my last video on how to create an HTML website, go watch that video first. You don't have to, but it's helpful in this scenario because I'm building on top of that video and the project that we started. So in this video, we're going to cover how to add CSS to our website to style it and make it look like an actual website. So let's get started. As you can see, we have the website we built in the last video. It's a really terrible looking website. This is supposed to be a menu. It does not look like a menu. We have some basic HTML code and a couple of pages. So we have our task list and our features page. Now, to get started with CSS, what we're going to do is we're going to add a CSS file. So we're going to do a file, new file, and this is going to be, we're going to go ahead and save it as our app.css file. Now in here, we're just going to start basic. We're just going to do a let's do a body HTML or CSS tag. Now there are two types of CSS tags that we're going to talk about right now in this video, and that is going to be our primary tags, which are going to cover our HTML elements. And then we're going to have CSS classes that we customize and create. And we'll cover that in a second. Body is going to be kind of a generic HTML CSS class that covers everything inside of the body element. And so we want this to cover 100% of the width and 100% of the height and nothing more, nothing less. So we're going to do a width as 100 VW. Now for the width setting, we have a few options, and I'm going to cover those right now. The first is going to be a VW. That's going to be our viewing window or our viewing width. Okay, so for height, we have the same thing, height 100, but it's going to be VH, and that's going to be our viewing height. So if we set it like that, let me add this first. Okay, so we need to add in our HTML another link. This is going to be a style sheet, and the href is going to be app.css. We're going to save that, and what that's doing is that's telling our HTML file to look at the app.css file for this style sheet. So we're going to refresh, and you're not going to see much new, but if you inspect, you should see, if you inspect the element, go to body, and you'll see our 100 VH and 100 VW. So we can do some playing around. So to best explain this, we're going to actually add a background color to it of, let's just say, blue. Okay. And let's take a look here. We're going to refresh. And now you can see that our page is blue. Now you'll notice that if we resize the window in either direction, it's still going to be blue. The whole page is going to be blue. Okay. Now, I prefer to set it up in this way, so I know for sure it's going to cover the entire width and height of the screen. But you can also do it as a percentage. So it's going to fill 100% of the necessary area for this content. As you can see, it still does the same thing. Okay. And I believe the 100% will fill like 100% of its parent container. But in some scenarios, 100% will shrink it down into only what you need for the content you have in your HTML. So I prefer not to use that. I prefer to use VH and VW. Now, there's one more option that we're going to cover, and that is simply pixels. We can use PX instead of a percentage to tell it we want to cover 100 pixels wide and 100 pixels tall. We're going to save that and refresh. Now, you'll see how everything got squished together over here. It's because now it's only 300 pixels wide. So if we select our body element, it's 100 pixels wide. And you'll see, let's see, where's our body? So our body, you can see now on the screen, it's 100 by 100, okay? And all of this is overflow. So all of this is now outside of its frame. Now I want users to be able to scroll up and down, but I don't want a side-by-side scroll, because if you've ever been on a website and try to scroll with like a phone or something and it scrolls in this really funky way, I don't want that to happen. And so we're going to change this to an overflow-x, which is going to be your horizontal landscape. This is going to be hidden. And then the overflow y is going to be set to scroll. So anything that overflows in the X direction, you can't scroll, you won't see it, it'll be cut off. Anything in the Y direction will be able to scroll with it. So now we have this, and you can see this, there's a scroll bar there. And if we shrink our page, I can scroll through the website. But I cannot scroll left to right. That's exactly what I want. Okay, so we're going to get rid of the background color for now because I don't really need a background color at the moment. We're going to save that and we're going to set it back to white. Now, the second type of class that we have for CSS, so I mentioned we have kind of our standard classes. So body, there's also a standard like div class. You can do a standard image class. So if I change like image, this will change it for all image classes. And that'll be helpful in creating a theme, which we'll cover in a later video on how to create a theme with CSS. In this case, we're going to focus on just custom CSS. And so what we're going to do is we're going to add a class name to our div tag. And we're going to start with just the outer div tag here, which is going to hold our menu. So we're going to start working on the menu first, and then we'll move on to the rest. So in the div tag, we're going to add class name, and then quotations, and then you create a name for it. Now, these should be pretty organized, self-explanatory names. It's pretty important that that's the case. And so for this is going to be my menu wrapper, which is going to be the whole container that wraps the entire menu, okay? So this is going to be menu-wrapper. Now, one thing to note with class names is you can't have spaces in between the names, because in with class names, HTML and CSS, I can actually set a HTML element to work with multiple CSS classes. So I can do menu wrapper, I can do blue, I can do red, whatever it is, blue, skinny. I can create different classes and set a single HTML element to work with multiple CSS classes. And I'll cover that more in a little bit, probably. If not now, then I'll cover it in the next video when we cover creating a theme with CSS. But just know, if you want multiple words, typically you just use a little dash in there to cover the space. So if we save this right now, it's not going to do anything because for CSS, this class doesn't exist right now. And so it's not going to really do much. But in our app.css file, if we add a menu wrapper element. Now, one thing to note is when you write your own class name, you actually need to include a period before the name. So you'll see it lights up a little bit different. That's going to be our custom CSS wrappers or classes, I guess. And this is going to be the standard HTML CSS classes. Okay, and my bad, this should be actually a class, not a class name. I'm used to working in React where typically it's set as class name. In HTML, it's just going to be class. And so now we can see, if we expand this a little bit, we have our div class menu wrapper. If we click on it, we can see the style for it. And we can also hover over and try to find that menu wrapper. So if we just highlight it, you can see 150 pixels high and the entire screen width. Now, there's a couple things you'll notice. The first one is that there seems to be a margin around it. There's some white space around it. We don't want any margin with the header. We want it to take the entire left to right, top to bottom, or and then 150 pixels tall. We'll probably even shorten it to 100 pixels. So let's get rid of any margins. And also, there's a good chance that the body has some padding. Now, here's the difference. Margins, if you have a box, your margins is going to cover empty space around the outside of that box. So if you want this to take up the entire width and then you add a margin, it's actually going to make that box take up more space. Now, if you have a box and you add padding, what it's going to do is it's going to create an internal margin. And so if you want space between content and the box, you would use padding. And so I'm going to explain that a little bit here in just a second. If we set our menu wrapper to be a background color of blue, save it, refresh it. I'm going to close out of this for a second. Okay, so you see how there's this space here. Now, that could be one of two things. That could be an external margin on our menu wrapper element, or that could be padding on the body. So the body could be adding padding, so all the content is inset a little bit, or my menu wrapper could be adding margin where it's pushing away, it's shrinking itself so it's further away from things. And being that everything else is inset, I'm going to say it's probably padding with our body. And I actually want to get rid of padding. Now, with padding, you have three options. Actually, you have 5. So you have padding left, which is going to be your left padding, padding right, which would be your right padding. You have padding top and bottom, and then you have padding in general. Now, padding in general, in most cases, we're just going to use that to affect all the padding. We're just going to set it to 0px. I don't want any padding, so it's 0 pixels of padding. We're going to refresh, and it doesn't actually look like that changed it. So that means it might have a margin. So the body itself might be pushing out. Oh, yeah. So it's got an 8 pixel margin. So now we're going to set the margin to be 8 pixels as well. Refresh. And let's see. Oh, I set it to 8 pixels. No, I want that to be 0 pixels. And now it got rid of all the space. So I'm gonna kind of, now that I have it where I want it, I'm gonna kind of show you how this works. So say we have a border on this. We're gonna do a 2 pixel black solid border. Okay. You'll see this border show up. Now, if I add a margin to this, we're gonna do a margin of, say, 10 pixels. You'll see that the border and the blue background shrinks itself or pushes itself away from other elements with a margin. Oops. So I'm going to save the app.css, refresh. So you see how it pushes away by 10 pixels from everything else. Now, if I change this to padding, it'll actually do the opposite. So it won't push itself away, but it'll push all the content inside of it to be away from the edges by 10 pixels. Now, it's going to be kind of hard to see because none of the content really fits inside of the header right now. But I'm going to just set it as a default, and we'll see it play a little bit later. So our body, 0 pixels padding, 0 pixels margin. So everything's right up against the edges now. And then our menu wrapper, we have a padding of 10 pixels wide. Now, you'll see how everything goes top to bottom. So all the HTML content we've added has been from top to bottom. And that is because there's a default setting for div class elements in CSS that sets them as a column. But what I actually want is I want those in a row format. So just like a table, you have columns and you have rows. I'm going to set this up as a row. So we're going to do a flex direction. Oops. As a row. And then we're going to set our display type to be a flex display. Now I'm going to explain that in just a moment, but we should see these line up side by side. It's kind of hard to see because of the black border or blue border or background. So I'm going to get rid of that and the border that we don't need. Excuse me. So I'm getting rid of the border in the background we don't need. So you can see these are now like right up against each other. There's no margin there. So with display, we have a couple of options. You'll see if we do display, there's a couple of fill-in options. There's a block, there's contents, there's flex, grid, inline block, all kinds of stuff. There's a few main ones that we use. One of those is block. Block is just like a block editor. If you've ever used WordPress, your block display is your default. It just kind of throws everything in there as like stackable blocks. The next one that I primarily use is a flex box. And what that does is it kind of automatically manages how everything fits together, and it's more relative to the space. And so a flex direction, you can choose, okay, I want things to kind of line up in a row direction. I want them to line up in a column direction, but things are kind of flexible and just kind of fit as they should. So if I shrink the window, I don't know if we'll see it much right now because of it, but you'll see how the elements just kind of move and modify a little bit. You'll see that a little bit more as we develop the site. I like using flex direction or flex display where I can. Another one that I commonly use though is the grid display. And what grid display is it literally sets you up a table that the viewers can't see. But for simplicity's sake right now, we're not going to go into developing a full table grid for our website. We're just going to simply use a flex display. So now you'll see we still don't really have much of a menu, and we really do need a background color. We need our buttons formatted. We need a lot of work done still. And you'll also notice our image is still tremendously too large. So we're going to start working on a few of those things. We're going to add a background color of just black for now. Blue is really harsh, but we're going to set this to black. And if you'll notice, this is a really large menu top. And so we're going to shrink it down to only be 100 pixels. And now we have a pretty decent sized menu. Now the other thing I'm going to do is one more thing. I'm going to set a position type on here. There's a few options. You have absolute, fixed, relative, static, sticky. Inherit is just kind of your default. It inherits from the parent. Absolute is like, hey, if you want something to be at this specific pixel coordinate, because you have coordinates with pixels, you have your X coordinate and your Y coordinate. If you're like, I want it to always be, no matter where the user scrolls, what the user does, it will always be in this specific position, then you would use your absolute position. Relative position just kind of bases off of everything else. And so it's not tied to a specific location. It just kind of fits in where it can. And that's going to be your most commonly used. Static and sticky, I don't use too often. Now, fixed is the next one that I'm going to cover. Fixed allows you to set coordinates like absolute, where you say, hey, I want this to be in this position. And if a user scrolls, it stays above everything else in that position. Absolute, when you scroll away, because if you imagine it this way, you have a page that's 500 pixels wide and a viewing screen that's 300 pixels, but your page is actually 600 pixels, okay? And you tell an element, you set an element to absolute, and you put it at 100 pixels by 100 pixels. So it's sitting up here. But if a user scrolls down, now they're sitting at like 300 pixels instead of 0 pixels. So they're sitting lower in your website. This element is going to scroll up and out of viewing because it's at 100 pixels by 100 pixels. And I'll show you that in just a second. Let me create a much longer page. So I'm going to set the body of this to be 300 VH, which is going to be 300%, 3 times the viewing height, to allow us to now scroll. So you'll see how everything just kind of scrolls out of the way. Then we're going to add a left, right, top, and bottom position. Now, in most cases, we can stick with a left position and a top. Everything gets based off of 0, 0, which is the top left corner. And so we're going to set our left to be 0 pixels still. But we're going to set our top to be, 100 pixels, just to explain this a little bit. So you'll see that now our menu is not at the very top of the page, it's 100 pixels down. And if we scroll away, that menu scrolls away, but that menu is stuck in that exact position. Now, if we set this to relative, okay, then everything else is going to fall under it. You know, it's in a relative position, so everything's gonna work relative to each other. In an absolute position, everything else is just gonna kind of work around it instead of relative to it, right? Now, if we set this to a fixed position, you'll notice that when we scroll, that menu stays exactly where it's at and it doesn't move. So I personally liked fixed positions for menus. I don't know if we'll stick to the full 100 pixels tall, but we are going to move the menu back to the top of the main page, and everything is going to scroll under it. Okay, now you'll notice one thing with fixed and absolute positions is it kind of lays on top of other content, and I want the rest of this page to be pushed down 100 pixels. So I'm going to create a new div element down here. Class equals page wrapper. So this is going to be our main page wrapper. I'm going to move everything inside of it. And then we're going to close off that div tag. And in CSS, we're going to add a .page wrapper class. And we're going to set this to be a position of absolute and a height of 100 pixels. So this is going to be 100 pixels down from the top because that's how tall our menu is. And then our left is going to be 0 pixels, right is going to be 0 pixels, and bottom of 0 pixels. So this is going to kind of bring it down from the top, but then just kind of stretch to all the outside areas. And if we refresh, now our content is below our menu. But as we scroll, you can kind of see how it scrolls through our menu page. So now what we want to do, there's a way where we can make content lay on top of each other in layers. If you've ever done like digital art, you know there's a element called layers. And there's a way to do that in CSS. It's something called z-index. So if you think of a 2D or a 3D grid, you have your X, Y, and then typically Z is your depth. And we can set our Z depth. Now, most content is going to be sitting at 0. But if we set this to say 10, now this menu is going to be sitting on top of everything else that is less than 10. Now, if I set our page wrapper to be z-index greater than 10, now our page content is going to sit on top of the menu, right? And so there's a way to layer it by numbers to create your depth and lay things out in a clean, smooth way. Okay, so now let's work on getting this image, our logo, into a nice clean space where it looks decent and it's not taking up our entire page anymore. So we're going to go to our IMG element, our logo image element, and we're going to add a class. This is going to be our logo class. And then the div element, I don't know if we'll need to use this, but we're going to go ahead and add a class. It's going to be just simply logo wrapper. Okay, so we may or may not use this class, but it's there in case we do, but we are for sure going to mess with this class first. So image logo. So we're going to do a dot logo. And now we can set some parameters. Now the first thing I want to set is a height and a width. I want the height and the width to fill up only about 80% of the height, and I want the width to be relative. So we're actually just going to set the height to an 80%. And you can see that now that image fills in 80% of the height of that menu. Now, another option that we have is to set our logo wrapper, that container, to be a height of 80%. And then to have our logo itself be a 100%. So it's going to fill in that entire container. So we're creating a container that's 80% height, but then we're telling the logo to fill in that container as much as it can. So I'm going to save and refresh. And you can see it doesn't really change much. It just changes how things are developed. Now I'm actually going to set this to 90%. It's a little bit bigger. And you can see now we have that. Okay, so we have our logo in the left-hand corner, but it's a little closer to the edge than I want it. I want to kind of bring it in a little bit. So now we're going to set the margin left of our container to be, say, 20 pixels wide. This will push it away from the edge by 20 pixels. And if we inspect this, you'll see we have our menu wrapper container here, which is kind of this whole space. And then we have our, let's go to our logo wrapper right there. And then you'll see our image itself, which is right there. So logo wrapper, and then the image itself. Now I actually want that margin, my mistake, on the logo wrapper, on the container, not the logo. So now you'll see we have our logo wrapper here, which has a margin on the left of 20 pixels. Then we have the actual image there. Okay, so logo, wrapper, and logo. Logo, wrapper, and logo. Now you'll notice on the logo itself that we actually have a lot of white space at the top, which is causing the image to sit lower than it should. And that's just a matter of having clean formatting on the image. And so later that'll probably get cropped and cleaned up a little bit. Now, let's go ahead and work on creating and styling some buttons, okay? So we're going to go to our two items here, the Ahref developments here. We're going to do a class equals menu button. Okay, so this is a type of menu or a type of button we're creating. We're going to go ahead and copy and paste for both of those elements so we can see it working side by side. Now, let's set that up in CSS. This is going to be our menu button. The first thing I want to do is you'll see they're squished together right now, and we want to space those out. So we're going to do a margin left on these of, let's say, 10 pixels, and a margin right on these of, actually, we'll just leave it at a margin left. And this should push them away a little bit. See? The other thing I want to do is I want my logo on the left-hand side, and I want the menu objects on the far left side, backwards. I want the logo on the top left, and I want the menu objects on the far right side. To do that, we're going to create another wrapper element, another div wrapper element for our links. And this is going to have a class of menu button wrapper. Okay, let's save that. I'm going to go to app.css, menu button wrapper. Oops. Don't forget the period there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to tell this that we want this to fill up the entire space from left to right except for the logo space. Now how do we do that? So our logo doesn't have a specified width right now, and so we want to give it a specified width. So we're going to set the logo wrapper to a width of, say, 20%, which gives it more than enough space. I mean, 20% somewhere about right here. So it gives it a lot of space to move around, but it also allows us to say, hey, we're going to give the logo a little piece of it, and then we're going to take the rest. So our menu button wrapper is going to take a width of 100%, or sorry, 80%. And let's see if that did what I wanted it to do. So now we have our menu button wrapper is about 80%, and our logo wrapper, oops, where is it? Where are you? Our logo wrapper right there is about 20%. Okay. And let's check one more thing. So you'll see how our logo wrapper, we have a margin on the left-hand side, but our right side menu, we don't. We're going to go ahead and add a margin to match. So we have a 10, or let's see, we have a 20 pixel left margin on the logo wrapper. We're going to add a 20 pixel right margin for our button wrapper. And then we're going to set this up. Again, anytime you have a div container, you have to set the display that you want. We want a flex display, and we want these buttons in a row. Oops. So flex direction is going to be in a row. You'll see now they are side by side. They're still not quite where we want them. So we're going to set our wrapper to align the content. So you have justify content and align items are going to be the primary alignment tools with flex direction. So align, I can't ever remember which one's which, so we're just going to find out. So align items, let's just do center, and then justify content is also going to be center. And now these should end up somewhere around here in the very center of this container. Okay, now we're going to change one of these. I believe justify is going to be a top to bottom and align is going to be left to right. So we're going to change left to right to a flex end. So this is going to tell it, move these items to the end of this box. You also have a flex start and a center option. So we're going to do a flex end. Okay, so align items in this case is actually handling top to bottom. So we want align items to be a center, and we want our justify content to be a flex end. And now they are on the right hand side. Now this will switch up. I believe if you have a column, if flex direction is a column, then align items is your left to right and justify content is top to bottom. They kind of switch around on you sometimes. So typically I just kind of set them both and then modify one to figure out which one does which. So now we kind of have the layout that we want. And you can see how it kind of grows and moves and shifts as we resize the window. Now let's go back to styling our menu button. The first thing I want to do is I want to create a box around the text. And so we're going to do a width of, say, let's do a 70 pixel wide button. And let's do a 50 pixel tall button. 50 pixel. And for now, let's just set the background color to white so it's plain as day what we're looking at. We'll change this later. So just like that, we have some very ugly buttons, but the whole thing is clickable. So now we're going to set our justify content as center and our align items as center to move those items to the middle. That didn't work. Let's set our display to a flex display. And there you go. So now we're getting close. So this underlined and red text is because we're using an ahref element. And that's kind of the default, like, oh, a user has clicked on a link. Let's turn it red so they know they've clicked on it. Oh, this is a link. Let's underline it so they know it's a link. We're going to get rid of that for our menu button. And so what we're going to do is we're going to set a class name for these as, let's do a menu button a element. We're going to set that for both buttons as well. We're going to add that in here. Oops. Now we're going to set this to be a to remove the underline. And I'm going to remember, let's see, text decoration. It's going to be none. If we refresh, you'll see the underline has gone away. So what we can do is we can tell this, hey, we want to add styling if the user has visited this link. So we're going to do this, and we're going to add a semicolon and do visited. And if they visited, let's change the color of the text to white, or let's change it to red, actually. Save that, refresh. So this should change the text to red. Now, we actually don't want it to change the text. And so we're going to set it to the same font color that we're going to use, which for now is just going to be plain old black. Okay. Refresh, and there that is. Now, there's also a option for before. There's an option for one of them is if, so let's set the visited, and then one of them is for if they hover over it. This is actually a cool one to add to websites to kind of make the user experience a little unique. So if they hover over it, we want to change the color to, say, green. So we're going to refresh. If I hover over, you can see the text color changes to green. And we're going to utilize this at some point here shortly for actually our menu button. So we're going to actually go ahead and copy this. I want to set this to a hover. Now what we can do is we can cause things to grow and to shrink. We can change the color of things. So for right now, we're going to change the color to, let's do a yellow. And then we're going to get rid of the width, height, and margin because all those will be inherited by the main class. And we're going to tell us to transform it by scaling it. Let's do 125. I believe that is the correct syntax to scale at 125%. Oops, that is definitely not right. So this should actually, my apologies, be 1.25. So this is this is gonna be 125%. So we're gonna refresh, and now you'll see it grows about 25%, and it turns yellow when we hover over it. Now let's turn this into some actually nice CSS. So we're gonna go to colorhex.com. Or it might be hexcolor.com. Let's find out. Yeah, we're going to pick some colors here. For our menu, let's go ahead and do like a navy blue. So we're going to copy this hex key. And in our menu object, we're going to change the color. Instead of black, it's going to be this hex key. And if we click on this, what's cool is we can actually see, we should be able to see some palettes that uses this. So I'm not seeing a... see. Complementary color is this color. I'm not liking that color. Let's see if we can find a different dark blue. Or maybe we use this color of blue. There's all kinds of colors you can check out. We can also go to palettes. Let's go to some of the popular palettes right now. Let's just go ahead for now. I'm not loving that one. Let's go now to just our top contributors. Oh, we don't care about that. Latest palettes. There we go. Black to pink. Okay, I like this palette. Let's use this. So we're going to use this as our menu color. And we're going to set our menu buttons to be this lightish blue. And we're going to set the hover to this cream color. So that's going to be our menu button color. And this is going to be if they hover over it. Actually, let's set this to the text color. And in the menu button as well, we'll do color. So that's our text color. And then let's use this purplish one for if they hover over the button. So we've just kind of changed some of the themes so you can see, okay, so I'm not loving this yet, but you'll see when I hover, it changes the, and 1.25 is probably a little much. 1.1 is probably enough to capture the user's attention. It's just a slight little thing there. Now let's actually go ahead and swap this. So our hover color is going to be for our menu button. Let's see how that does. Oh, that was the wrong. Yeah. Okay. So button color is going to be our background color. And this is going to go down here. There we go. So now we have some buttons that get a little bit lighter when we hover over them. And now we're going to change our, we're going to actually round the edges a little bit. So what we can do is add a border radius to these elements of, say, 10 pixels. We'll just see how this looks. It's probably going to be a really big radius on these. Actually, that was about right. That's about where I want them. Now, the other thing I really dislike with certain websites is when buttons are different widths. And I actually like to just set a button and then just keep it at that width. So for a menu button, we have it set to 70. Let's increase this to 100. Oops, that's a lot. 100 pixels. And now they're a little bit bigger. There's some fun little buttons here. And now let's fix the text because the text is a little small. It's a little ugly. So we're going to go to our H6. And this is going to be an HTML element. We're just going to keep it. And we're just going to modify that. So H6. We'll do a font size of, say, 15 pixels. See how that looks. It's a little bit bigger. Okay, so now we're going to add a font to our buttons to kind of clean it up a little bit. So we're going to do a font family. We're going to set it up with a bucket MS font. And if that fails, then we're going to do a sans serif font. So this is kind of our fallback. If the first one fails, it'll go to the second one, so on and so forth. And we'll refresh. And now we have these new fonts for our buttons. Now, you'll notice one thing is when our button gets bigger and lighter, it gets kind of harder to read. And so we're going to take our color for that text when it's hovered over. We'll go to color hex. We're going to paste it in here. And then we're going to go in here and we're just going to make it a little bit darker. And we're going to copy that and paste it in for a visited font. Refresh. Or sorry, not our visited. That should be for our hover. There it is. So we're going to set our color to this when it's hovered. Now, your background color is going to be your background color. The standard color element is going to be your foreground color, which is going to be like your text content. So we're going to refresh and hover. And now our font, it gets darker, but it actually makes it worse. So let's see if changing this to a white color actually helps. Okay. So white was the move. So when you hover over a button, now it grows, it turns white, so it's readable. And we have a couple of buttons that actually work. Now, when they go to other pages, we haven't copied the menu over. So let's go ahead and do that now. let's just copy our entire menu, our menu over to the different pages that we have. And then don't forget to copy the style sheet relation to our head. So now when we go to the different pages, we have that menu. And then we also need to copy over our page wrapper to the other pages so we can still see that content. Okay, there we go. And features, and if we click on this button, we go home. So now we have a small menu somewhat working, and I'm actually going to scale this menu down just slightly more. So we're going to go to our menu wrapper. We're going to set the height, let's do 80 pixels instead of 100, just kind of make it a little more minimalistic. Now remember, as we scroll, that menu will stay there. If you decide, hey, I don't want my menu to stay there when I scroll, then simply change the position fixed to an absolute position. And now, if we refresh, that menu will go with the page. That's all we're going to cover in this video. In the next video, I'll cover changing the layout of the page itself. We'll set up a fully responsive page, so as you open and close, things stay looking good. So if you see on a full page, there's a lot of space over here in the margins. And so we'll kind of go through the details of how to fix a lot of that, as well as we'll build out the page itself on our different pages, especially our homepage, so this content starts looking nice. But my recommendation, before you go watch the next video, spend some time playing around with CSS, build your own menu the way you like it, look at some nice websites, and figure out how you want to kind of design it. And if you like this video, like and subscribe below. We'll have more content related to this series coming out, as well as a couple new courses coming soon.